Let's join our friend here, Mike Schaefer, Husker 24/7. What's up, Schaefer?
Hey guys, how we doing?
Mike J,
You busy?
Yeah, you busy?
Yeah, just a little bit. I didn't know what to think of everything being moved up and kind of crammed into that space right behind the end of the regular season. And if I learned anything on Monday, it said I'm going to definitely ask for that week off next year and just be somewhere tropical. Because that was wild. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm not a therapist, and yet yesterday I had to be a therapist and a psychologist and a recruiting writer.
Oh man,
And I don't know what there's a lot of hats.
Yeah,
and I own a lot of hats, but I had to use all of them yesterday.
man.
And that was
Dave, I finally had to shut it down. Like I just
Oh, you get the luxury of shutting it down?
I
When you're called 24/7, you don't have that luxury.
yeah, I had to make a mental health decision.
Yeah, I get it.
Listen,
get it. Yeah.
at one point yesterday, and bless my heart for not falling victim, I looked at I have a brand new thing of tequila. I had a coupon for $40 off if you spend X amount of money. And I went out in the garage and I looked at it and I'm like, could I pull a Bugs Bunny, dive, and fit through the opening in that bottle? And I decided, nope, couldn't do it. I better go parent. So I went back in the house. But I did contemplate seeing if I could just like springboard and get inside. Because I
was it the years of physics that let you know that was not going to be possible? Or?
I mean, I'll try anything once.
That thing wet.
Fair enough.
I did think of you last night for more than one reason. As they panned the audience, and the Broncos deal as Jameis Winston was cashing at the window because he bet on Denver. A lot of Coors bottles, and I'm like, you know what? That's a Mike J. Schaefer thing.
Yeah, no, it's believe it or not, the Coors is quite popular in Denver.
Never heard of it.
All right, my sarcasm meters it's going way up for this one.
As you filter through the information yesterday, at what point, like, was any of it surprising to you? Let's start there.
Well, I want to be very careful in how I word this.
Why?
Very careful in how I word this, because there's stuff that happened yesterday, like. Yeah, there was some stuff that surprised me in how things were presented or reported. I guess we'll put it that way because
I know. Listen, I've already bashed people, and not in the industry, but just irresponsible media. So you can too if you want.
Well, I don't need to be a media scold because people make mistakes or things happen, whatever. But I just found it fascinating how quickly stuff was being put out that And I'm in a situation where we have guys down at Florida State who do a tremendous job covering that team and are really well tied in. And I could basically go to them and be like, hey, have you heard this? And they would be like, yeah, I mean, there's some of that out there, but here's why it's not likely to happen in the, immediacy or things of that nature.
I completely agree.
And so I think in the rush to add to everyone drinking from the fire hose, I was a little surprised at some of the stuff that was getting put out that, there might be an element of truth to it and maybe it could happen down the road, but it certainly wasn't happening on Monday.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a part of me that in a society where media literacy just gets worse by the second, we have an extra responsibility to be as accurate as we possibly can. And so, I get that more people have more fun talking about what could be in the speculation and the rumors than what is actually happening. But there are real people, real honest to God people whose names are associated with what reports are saying, who are also responsible for helping recruit or have position players in their room who have the internet and have no idea what the hell is going on. And we owe a better responsibility to real people with real names if we're going to put stuff out there. So that's my entire.
Hey, I love the fact you prefaced that with "I'm not going to media scold," and then
I mean, look, if you want me to scold, I can get a lot more scoldy.
From
than
your
that.
lips to God's ears, what you just said. I mean, real life things involved, and it was just like, what are we doing? Well, I was so disappointed. I felt
the
like
utter lack of context with some of it too. It's just like, I mean, I know we want to get stuff up on the internet, but man, like we owe it to try to be as accurate as possible. And I'm not trying to, everyone's got to do their job and everyone has their information, but we all have that little radar in our brain that, is this publishable? Do I have everything vetted here? I mean, I sent one text and I refuted something in 2 seconds.
Schaefer, just so we're all on the same page here, I don't want to assume everybody's as online as we all are. Are we talking about the Knighton portion of the conversation?
We're talking about Knighton. We're talking Garrett McGuire. We're talking about assistant coaches. We're, like Tony White was one thing, and there was a lot of traction to that. And that started, well before Monday. But I think we kind of saw things get a little ahead of the skis. And I don't know what's going to happen with Nebraska's assistant coaches. And I don't want to pretend like, Terrence Knighton is definitely going to be Nebraska's defensive line coach in 2025. And Garrett McGuire is definitely going to be Nebraska's wide receivers coach. But I know as of right now, on Tuesday, December 3rd, they're working for Nebraska. And so I like, and then you have signing day on December 4th. I'm just like, there is a part of me that we have a responsibility to put accurate information out there and not fan the flames. And, some of yesterday, I felt like I was a firefighter trying to put some stuff out that wasn't quite happening as was being discussed.
Hey, Mike J., as you're kind of looking at how tomorrow unfolds, what are the odds? Like, there's the unintended consequence would be something like, well, if such and such and such and such is entering the portal, or this is happening, it's actually a positive for those potential signees for tomorrow. Has that been kind of on your barometer?
Yes and no. Like, there's always there's the obvious sort of cliche of when one door, when a door shuts, a window opens kind of thing. So I think you can view it in that sense. I sort of tend to take the view of, in the case of Jamari Butler and Mekhi Bayer, two players that I think highly of, that I think, are good college players. There's also the realm of which it can be mutually beneficial for both Nebraska and for those individuals to not be together for the 2025 season. Mm-hmm. They both can have good things can happen for Nebraska because opportunity will pop up for other players that those two have seeded their reps and their opportunities for. Good things can happen for them when they go somewhere else and everything can move on fine. It hurts because they're names that we know and they're players that you recognize and there's flashpoints that they've had in their career. But it doesn't mean the program has to shut down. It doesn't mean the defense is going to fall apart. It doesn't mean that Nebraska can't replace what they were able to do. It's just on the coaching staff to figure out how they're going to do that. It's on players to determine, hey, Jamari's not here anymore. Maybe it's my time to be a defensive lineman at Nebraska. Maybe it's my time to be a vocal leader. Mekhi Bayer's not here. Maybe it's my time to step in as an inside linebacker. I mean, it's all about how you want to frame it. And that's life in the transfer portal. When one guy leaves, another guy gets to fill that spot. It's what that guy does and how the coaching staff prepares them is ultimately what matters.
Schaefer, has anybody entered the portal yet that has caused you any heartburn?
Hey,
I think Jamari Butler and Mekhi Bayer are good players. I think that they were going to be good players again in 2025. But there probably hasn't been like an all Big Ten type of person that has entered the portal. Like, as much as I like Jamari Butler, we're still talking about 7.5 sacks across 2 seasons. We're talking about a guy who absolutely dominated in the Ohio State game, but there was times that he was unavailable because of injury or everything else. So, I mean, again, I don't want to speak ill because these guys would have played for Nebraska. I have no doubt about that. But, I mean, I think sometimes we take returning numbers or returning experience and we build it up for more than what it is. I mean, how often do we do that when a player comes into the program? how lofty were our expectations for Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayer and Billy Kemp and kind of Inoa and all of these different wide receivers. And it's largely been Trey Palmer and Samari Toure have been the only real difference makers Nebraska's had at those positions. So I'm just saying, like, you know, the portal doesn't always mean that a player who leaves somewhere to go somewhere else or comes to Nebraska is going to be an even better version than what they were somewhere else. Sometimes they're just going to be the same guy they are somewhere where they're not.
Schaefer, what about like just the whole, excuse me, just considering how emotional the last 2 years is, do you factor in like just the emotional well-being, like just simply a fresh start? Because I think sometimes there's this tendency to make it kind of linear, right? Like playing time versus not playing time or whatever. Sometimes it's like, who is it? Is it Snicker? Like the people that just want to get away for a while? Like what if it is just like, could be something as simple as like the Snickers thing?
I mean, yeah, there's the element of wanting a fresh start. I guess there's a part of me that you're 2 years into this build, needing a fresh start seems a little early, but maybe if
Although
you want
you
to
would
call
probably agree it's been a little overly dramatic, right?
Oh, yeah, well, in terms of yesterday or just the entirety of the 2 years?
The 2
Or the
years.
entirety of basically me covering Nebraska football? I mean, I think drama and Nebraska football kind of go hand in hand. I don't know if you can divorce yourself from that.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
How about just yes?
Yeah, that's probably fair.
What do you think, Mike?
But it's like we've made this into a 365-day-a-year thing. Like, I don't know that you can just remove drama from it.
Yeah.
Like it's always going to be there to some degree. There's like a 5-week period somewhere after spring ball and somewhere before summer workouts really kind of get going full bore where you sort of forget that the football program is still, it's there, but they're usually not making news in that stretch of time. That's bad news. So, you kind of have to remember that 5 weeks versus the rest of the 47 weeks of the year, I guess.
Yeah, Schaefer, May and June are nice, aren't they?
What was that?
I said May and June are nice, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, those May is like the best month of the year. I never would have thought that before, but now like May is fantastic. I try to sneak in a vacation in May. Usually don't work as many hours in May. Every other month, less so. But May's a good month.
Schaefer, as we kind of sit here, obviously we've talked a lot about a lot of the things that happened over the last day or so. If you were a betting man, I'm not asking you to report unsourced information or anything, but if you were a betting man, you think Nebraska goes in-house or outside hire for defensive coordinator?
I mean, if I'm guessing right now today, just based off of what I have heard through, starting in the summer when John Butler was hired all the way to where we are now, I would bet on John Butler being Nebraska's next defensive coordinator, but that's because it fits the sort of puzzle that has been presented to me since July of last year. July of this year. So because of that, it's kind of hard to move off of it. But if Matt Rhule is looking for a reset, if he has looked at these last 2 years and thinks, this needs to look different, maybe they do want to go outside. Maybe he does want to try to do something differently. But as it had been expressed to me more than on one occasion, Matt Rhule's the kind of guy that likes to work with people before he elevates them into those kinds of positions. And that kind of has fit the narrative both for Dana Holgorsen and for John Butler. I mean, we go back, he wanted Dana Holgorsen as an analyst before, he ended up here in Lincoln in November. I think in large part because if he was going to make a move, he wanted that guy on staff. I think John Butler, very similar thing. He wanted to work with John Butler before he was ever going to make John Butler the defensive coordinator. I feel like that's what 2024 was. I feel like the end of Tony White in Nebraska was going to be reached here at the end of 2024, almost regardless of how things went, because he was going to have likely opportunities elsewhere, and Nebraska was positioning themselves to potentially replace him in-house. So you just had a seamless transition. The bigger question is, with everything Matt Rhule knows now between 2 years of Big Ten football, does he want to run a lot of this back, or does he want a complete fresh start like he's doing on the offensive side? I mean, those are kind of the big questions to me.
Even up to like 8:30 yesterday, I thought Nebraska could squeeze one more year out of Tony Butler. But having said that, and they clearly can't, is there anything you'd like to see Nebraska continue or change philosophically on defense if like you were in the hiring business, Dave?
The hard part for me is that, one, I'm not smart, so that's always difficult. So for me to be able to identify what it is exactly that I'd like to see changed is always, really reactionary. So what I'm going to say may not really necessarily fit any real defensive principles. But one of the things that was always difficult is that Nebraska played such off coverage without providing an extra rusher or blitzing or, so you have to, it just feels like you're asking a lot of that defensive line to always be able to generate pressure, because otherwise you're just leaving these easy windows open. I mean, they just, Nebraska allowed so many completions, easy completions throughout the season. I mean, how many times did they have a quarterback who had an under 50% completion percentage? How many times was it under 60? It's a lot lower than you think. And so part of it to me is, can they find a defense that just doesn't allow such easy throws? Like I feel like teams were able to stay on the field for long stretches against Nebraska simply because of how the secondary principle and coverages were compared to what your defensive line was actually able to do. And I think that makes it really hard, especially in an era where, so much of it is quick passes, get it out, try to get numbers against, wherever you can on the field and go from there.
Schaefer, as you're looking at what you just kind of described with the defensive secondary and some of those things, in that sense, do you understand when you hear, and I've heard a lot of this, I assume you have as well, the fan base being hesitant of elevating John Butler into that role when we didn't necessarily love what we saw from coverages this year?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand it, because it's not like you'd be elevating a guy whose group was phenomenal this season.
Or has a ton of experience as a DC, to be fair.
Right. And so you're betting on kind of what he did in Buffalo, a little bit of the fact that he has Big Ten experience, the fact that he's a veteran coach. But ultimately, what we know in terms of media and what fans see are just a micro fraction of what happens behind the scenes. I don't know. Like, I've never had the chance to just sit down and pick John Butler's brain. He might be a really, really smart defensive guy. I have no way of knowing that. The presentation of how the program is presented, we don't know that much about John Butler. We really don't. And so to say that we do is just an outright lie, or you're someone who's able to traverse those circles in a way that most media and fans aren't. And so, from what I have heard, he's a really intelligent, successful defensive backs coach. I think it'd be hard to just judge him on this season alone. And ultimately, I'm going to put my trust in the idea that Matt Rhule is going to pick a defensive coordinator that aligns with his principles and can get similar results to what he's done throughout his career, which he's a defensive-oriented coach. I have a lot more trust in whatever Nebraska is going to do on defense because of Matt Rhule's track record than I do regardless of the name that's going to get mentioned as the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, that's what that's what I was talking about. Like, Schaefer, I'm with you. I guess I'm kind of you're gonna make fun of me. Surprised is too strong of a word. I am a little taken aback given two things that you've already mentioned in this interview that we have talked about for 12 months. Number one, we weren't sure how much longer we were going to get Coach White anyway. Number two, Coach Rhule has a track record of always playing good defense. Like he's surrounded himself with good defensive people. You've referenced both those things during this interview on your own unsolicited. Yet somehow we're here. Go ahead, you make fun of me like, Damon, how long have you been covering Nebraska? I get it, but man, I trust Coach Rhule. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's hard because you can trust him. Here's how I would sort of parse through it. I trust that he's going to have Nebraska's defense largely playing well, regardless of who his assistants are, because that's sort of been his MO, regardless of where he's at. That is if we were ranking things that I trust in the program, I think Nebraska's defense is almost always going to be average, above average, or good as long as Matt Rhule is here. And I think it's going to be more likely above average and good because of who he is and what he has done as a coach. The whole program, the whole team, the whole outlook, I trust what's happening with the defense. I'm not entirely sure that how this is all going to look with Dana Holgorsen, how he's going to marry that offense with his defensive style, how he's going to change as an in-game coach with those two different philosophies. That I have a lot more questions about than what ultimately is going to be Nebraska's defense or who the defensive coordinator is. I have a lot of blind faith that they're still going to be pretty good defensively in equal parts because of who will be involved at the top and Matt Rhule. And also, it's the Big Ten Conference. It's not like you're facing the best offenses in college football. It's not like you're getting a ton of innovation or even the best athletes in college football. Sometimes you're going to get Jackson Stratton and you're going to get an Iowa team that has no business playing in 2024 offensively, and you're going to benefit from that. Like that's the reality of Big Ten football. And that's why I think Nebraska's defense will be fair to good most of the time. Also, in part because Matt Rhule has been a good defensive coordinator.
That's Mike Schaefer of Husker 24/7. Schaefer, we appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Hey,
all right, guys.
Hey tomorrow, Schaefer.
All right, have a good one.